What do you think is the difference between being a victim and hiding behind a victim, like the role of a victim?
Yeah, I think it's for me, yeah, it's that difference between between victim and victimhood, if you
Got
like.
it. Okay.
Yeah. So I always say, like, if something bad happens to you, like if someone does something bad to you, you are a victim of that, right? If there's a crime or a break-in or an assault or anything like that, right? Then you are a victim of an assault, or you are a victim of a break-in, or you're a victim of, you could be a victim of a natural disaster, it doesn't matter, but like something happens to you,
Hmm.
right? But then it's how you deal with that, what happened to you, right?
Yeah.
And again, I really, really want to emphasize, because I've been there, that I felt so hard done by, or I felt so hurt by someone. So the feeling of being a victim is so natural, right? If something happens, if like, again, with a breakup, if someone did some really bad things to me, um, you know, I've had a partner, like in the past, I have had a partner who cheated, or all this kind of thing. So in a way, I'm a victim of being cheated on. But then I also created a victimhood of poor me, and it was validated by people, right? Because anyone who knew would say, "Oh yeah, that's so terrible of that person," and "Oh, poor you," right? So it also gave me a sort of, it gave me support,
Yeah.
and it gave me the feeling of, like, not like, oh, I'm in the right, but more of like, it gave me a safety of, like, this is not my fault,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
could, like, but it also disempowered me,
Yes.
right? Whereas if I, and also there was also the fear of, because when I said, again, like, if I take ownership for not so much my part in that happening, in the bad thing happening, but if I take ownership in the whole relationship and where things were going, or in how I reacted to it, or what I do with that, right? Then it nearly felt as if, by taking ownership again, it felt as if I um, diminished the sadness I felt about what happened to me, if that
Yeah.
makes sense,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so there was an element of wanting to stay that victim, because that allowed me to get support, it allowed me to get the sympathy of other people, right? So, and if I was more strong and stood up, then it was kind of like, oh well, clearly it's not so bad, so off you go. And I think that can be very well, dangerous to a degree, really, like, to because staying there stops you again from, you're talked about healing trauma. I think the staying in that victim role
Hmm.
stops you from healing, because um, you make yourself um, dependent, and you make yourself reliant on people seeing you in that light,
Yeah.
right? Whereas if you step out of that, you can grow in your power. And I think that's so helpful. Um, But I think to do that, you need to again realize to let go of that blame element, especially towards yourself, like seeing that. Um, Let me give you, I know we spoke about this, I think, actually in our call, and I'm going to use the example because, as I said, I've never had, I've never been actually abused, but I've been in relationships where things were not as they should be. And
Hmm.
one of the things is around this taking ownership, that um, when there is abuse in a relationship in any form, you
Hmm.
are a victim of that abuse. You're in no way ever responsible for someone doing that at you, even if you're things of provoking and everything else, right? It's like, well, if I provoke someone else, they still should not hit me, right?
Yeah.
That hitting or whatever else is happening is still their responsibility, and you're a victim of that. But if you want it to change, you know, again, it is their responsibility. So if they are doing that, you cannot rely on them not doing it. You have a responsibility for how you deal with it. And what's the most powerful thing in that, and I've learned that also from just relationships that, weren't right,
Mm-hmm.
that there can be a long period where you feel unable to change it, right? Or where you feel, yeah, but it's not my fault, so I should not have to change anything, right? But if you, for your sake, want to change something, just focus on what do I need to either get out of this or to change things.
Got it.
Forget about the other person. That's their responsibility. You look after you and see what you need and find and see that if you take responsibility and if you make your choices that help you to change things or get out of it,
Mm-hmm.
that has nothing to do with you taking blame for any of it. It just means that you empower yourself to change things for you.
That makes sense. Why do you think why do you think it's so enticing to stay in that victim role?
I think if I look at my own examples, as I said, it was like for me, as I said, the shift really came when I stopped relating taking ownership with blame, because I thought if I in any way stop being the person who this happens to, if I start taking ownership of my own life and I starting, then that nearly takes away that this happened to me. Then nearly it becomes like, whereas I can, as I said, when I learned that I could be, hey, look, this has happened to you, however much power you take, how much empowered you become, this still happened to you. You still, you can still feel bad about it without being a victim.
Yeah.
And also, um, the other enticing thing, as I said, is you get a lot of attention. As I said, I remember in situations where someone else did something bad to me, and if others would know, then they would sympathize with me, and I would get attention. And again, I wouldn't necessarily see myself as an attention seeker, but I'm not gonna lie. When something bad happened to me, and like for instance, even the parents of that person would take my side, it felt good,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because I looked at it as in it felt like, see, even they don't blame me for this. I didn't want
Yeah.
to be blamed.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Uh so going along with that, you know, when we're in victimhood, when we're playing the victim and we're getting the attention that we need, or or feel like we need, what do you feel would be a good alternative? Because they have to drop, if you're going to move forward, you have to drop the victimhood, which
Yeah.
means, like, unconsciously they know that means they're not going to be able to talk about it anymore at that length and get the accolades that goes along with that. So I'm just sitting here talking to you and I'm thinking to myself, okay, if I was a woman right now listening to us, and you're like, drop the victim thing and move forward and be joyful and
Mm.
happy, got it. But, like, how do I replace the the joy and the happiness that I'm feeding off of from other people? Like, where, so I dry up this cup. What's my first step in, like, filling up another cup to feel that dopamine or joy or whatever that I'm getting from victimhood? Like, I don't want to dry up. So what would be the first step that someone would take if they're listening right now?
Yeah. I think the first step is actually to see if you can have some people, and that can be a good friend. And again, if you need to, you can even do it through professional help as well. But I think um, to actually show people that regardless of what happened to you, you need their support, right? And I think this is specifically after, again, I gave my own example of a breakup, but it can be other things, like something happens to you. And what you see is in the beginning, people feel sorry for you and they'll do everything in their power to help you. But as soon as you seem to feel better,
Mm-hmm.
then people also assume you don't need their support anymore. So in a way, you need to stay down, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So I think if you can have, even if it's one or two good friends or family members or anyone where you can talk openly and say, hey, look, right, I want to get over this. Don't want to stay in this space of victimhood, if you like. But I'm afraid that when I become better, when I feel better, that, that's actually when I need you most, because then it's when I feel even more vulnerable, because
yeah,
that's the time where I'm not okay, not fully okay yet, you
yeah,
know? And so I think it's really important to try to build, and I know I saw some of your other podcasts of people who have certain specific events happening to them where there's peer support groups and stuff like that. So I think that can be really helpful, a place where you can really feel that you can still show up and you say, hey, you know, I know I'm not a victim or I don't want to be a victim, but I still want to be helped.
yeah.
I
I
still
love
need
that.
people to hold me, right?
Yep, yep,
So I think that's really, really important to acknowledge that for yourself, because
yeah,
that's where it starts with, and then to actually see, can you find the strength to ask for it, even if it's only for from one or two people or through a support group or some place where you can express this, where you know that you, in a way, as you say, without being the victim, you can still express those needs that you
yeah,
still have.
yeah. I love what you're saying, and um this is really making me realize how you're almost becoming more vulnerable doing what you're telling them to do.
Yeah.
Like you're going to have to, you can't hide behind your story anymore. You're going to have to come in front of your story and actually say like, "Hey, between my story and the journey to like finding peace, I'm like wide open here trying to find my way." So having that conversation is actually could actually be even just as heart wrenching as going through the story, because now you're actually like trying to show that you're opening the wound, coming out of the wound, letting it heal and moving forward. And that space in between there is scary because you don't even know what it looks like. So having that conversation with somebody, like you said, is a great idea, and it's going to be uncomfortable, but you have, if you want to get to one place to the other and, have that cup being filled consistently, like you said, you're going to have that conversation. I love that.
Yeah.
And
And
I
I think,
agree
and
with
this
you.
is why we all need a space. Like, for me, what most recently, even for the work I do, I've said like that my real mission is to contribute to a world where everyone can feel seen, heard, and held, right?
Oh,
Because I think we all need that.
yeah.
And but also we forget that we want it to happen without saying anything, right? And if you're lucky, you may have some friends or family who just read you like a book and just give it to you without asking. But I say that most of us have experienced that again, that you may sometimes have to actually, you have to break down your barriers. I remember that I thought to cope with any difficulty I ever had, I needed to board up, to put on a brave face, to show the world how strong I was. And I managed. I could do that for a long time, but I was crying inside, right?
Yeah.
And again, and then if something bad happened, I would get that support. So in a way, it was really like, even here on this podcast, like I have no problem sharing any challenge or anything I've experienced in my life. That's what this is for. And I think it's helpful. But I think it's also really important, as you say, for people to realize that the thing is, tomorrow something tiny might happen that someone else thinks like, well, you shouldn't be so upset about that. It's not so bad. But if you feel that upset, you need a space where you can see that, where you can
Yep.
share that. And you need to be able to first be really honest with your own feelings. Like, one of the things that really helped me and that I also help other people with is to that kind of thing of that We all have feelings in certain situations that we think we shouldn't have.
Mm.
This may be resentment or resistance. Like, I work a lot with people who care for others. And one of the things is when you care for others, not just professionally, or might be a family member, but also just if you really care about what happens in the world, if you're not also looking after your own needs, then what happens a lot is that you might start feeling resentment because you want that too. And if you're so naturally caring and giving, then sometimes it really hurts that other people, that you might not always get as much, or you feel you're not getting as much as that you give. So the thing is, though, that some people are naturally empathic and naturally just see what other people need, but others, they may not be necessarily uncaring, but they might not just see it like that. So you may have to ask. So I think one of the most important things is learning to first of all ask for support, and that's in my case, I know that I found that the most difficult, and then accept other people's support.
Wow. Yeah. Speaking of that, what is one thing that you've learned throughout your journey that if everyone knew it, you kind of gave a little example there, but if everyone knew it, their entire life would change? Do you have any other nuggets that you can share with us?
Yeah. Well, I think, as I said before, like I think it's two things that I may have mentioned already a little bit before, but one is, again, that taking ownership has nothing to do with blame. Stop blaming yourself in the sense, and also don't stop blaming yourself, but notice when you are, and then remind yourself, like, fault doesn't matter, right? It's like, yes, it would be fantastic if the world changed and if other people did this or that, but what small step can you allow yourself to take to make you feel better, to look after yourself without worrying about whether someone else should do it or whether you're to blame or them to blame, but just for you, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And also that realization that, um, I think actually maybe that's the most important thing. It's like looking after yourself is never selfish, because the better you feel, that is your gift in caring for the world as well. Just remind yourself, remember that if you walk into a room and someone shows you kindness or love
Mhm.
and compassion,
Mhm.
how much that gives you. So if you can manage to feel in a space where you feel happy or light or anything, right? And again, that doesn't mean that you never feel sadness or pain, but just when you can look after yourself so you feel good,
Mhm.
even without doing anything for anyone else.
Mhm.
Just think of how that impacts even just maybe your children, your partner, or just family or friends around. And then if you maybe just a kind gesture or smile in to the cash register in the supermarket, that could change someone's life as much as doing something really big.
Absolutely. Absolutely.